glue that we use to cement the PVC is different than the CPVC. It's two separate glues. There is a universal glue, but I mean, I generally try to stick with the one that was made for it. It works better. The first part of doing the fitting is primer, which cleans everything really good. The reason it's purple was so the inspector can tell that you've primed it, because a lot of, I shouldn't say, a professional plumber will never do this, but sometimes they have helpers, or sometimes they just have, might have a homeowner who does his own plumbing and gets it signed off on. And they think they'll save time by just, it's not going to leak, so they just throw the cement on there and not do the primer, and that will definitely be a leakage issue. Prime it first and then cement it. You have a little bit of time, a very narrow window to fit the fitting of the PVC onto the, I've primed this, I've glued this, and I've got a little bit of time to get my angle right or whatever, push it in, then it's sealed, and you have to cut it. You never get it off again. There's no removal solvent that takes it off. And these things are so cheap, like that's, 50 cents or less, So I don't really remember what a length, this might be $4, a 10-foot length of, $4 or $5, 10-foot length of 3/4. So, that's not expensive, not particularly expensive.
Are there any cons to using PEX besides the fact that you're limited in your heat?
Any cons to using PEX? No. I mean, as far as health-wise, I mean, purists will still argue that it has a potential for a health issue just because it's plastic. I don't feel that way. Some people do. I don't have any proof one way or the other. I really haven't looked that. I mean, I've looked, but I haven't really delved into it with a chemistry, aspect of it and try to get case studies or anything. So I wouldn't worry about that part. The only other thing with PEX that you might even think about is that the tool that's used to make the clamp, we have the pipe we want to fix. We have the clamp that goes over it. Well, there's a burr on that side. Let me get one that's not. It's been cut clean. These have to be cut clean, or else you waste time in trying to sand that down or something like that. So the little thing goes over there. That goes in there like that, and then you take this tool. This is a dual tool, so it's a 1/2 inch and a 3/4 inch. So this is a 3/4, so I take that tool and carefully and straightly and as perfectly as you can get it, we're gonna take those handles, and I'll let you do some of it over here. We're gonna take those handles and squish them together, and that's gonna, and you don't have to revolve it or anything. It's just any old place is gonna work. Get it in the center of that tool. You see it? And then we're gonna take this thing. I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna show you how it's done. We're gonna take this thing and we're gonna mush it down. So the only other problem with the PEX, which is a very minor problem compared to soldering and some of the other stuff, is that you have to be able to swing. You have to be able to. Sometimes this takes a lot of muscle. So I don't have any trouble in there. You're sitting there, just do it. But if you're in a tight spot or you're really awkward and you're going like this, it could be an issue. They do make ones with longer handles. You could put a pipe on the end of it and do it that way if you had room. I had Mark hold one side of it. Mark is an intern, and he was really laying into it, and I pushed the other side in a couple places where we just couldn't reach. Or you could do that stuff. You can pre-plan and do that stuff in a more open space and then just snake it in. But you really have to think about all that because once it's clamped and everything, you really can't unclamp it easily. You can. There is a tool. It's about $35. I don't own one because I don't think it's worth it for me. That actually cuts these rings. It cuts them, and then you can actually take the ring off and redo it. You can use the fitting over and all that. You have to cut the pipe. You'd have to cut. You can't cut portions. Yeah. You should cut it off. But all I do is take a hacksaw and just very gently, without getting into the plastic, gently cut the ring, and then let it, bring it off and take this out, and that's all set. So
is there a reason to use a copper ring with PEX pipe as opposed to the plastic rings and the ring clamps?
The copper is malleable. It squishes really nicely, and they do have iron rings. The PEX system has about 6 different variations, and I'm not going to get into the other. Most of the other stuff is for commercial work or industrial work, or plumbers have a specific application that they want to use stainless steel rings, or they have what they call clamp rings, which actually look like a sort of like a hose clamp. And there's other variations, but all the stuff in Lowe's and Home Depot and most of the plumbing supply is going to be this copper.
So it's bad to use the plastic fittings?
I never used them. I just the metal is what I use because it just I think it just lasts longer. I don't. The other thing to do, which is expensive, is what they call SharkBite. It will fit copper. You can because it's still all the same outside diameter. It'll fit the copper. It'll fit the PEX too, and it will fit certain CPVC sizes too. But the beauty of this thing is that there's a dual seal in here. There's a clamping seal, which has little stainless steel fingers. There's probably about 16 of them in there on this size, and I'll pass it around. And then there's a back seal, and once you get it in there, you actually can take it out with this little tool. You push this in here, and then you push it in like that, and it can turn. Once it's in there, it can turn without leaking, which is a neat thing. These things, I don't remember what this cost. It's probably like $8. Very expensive for a little thing like that, but the convenience, And then the beauty of it is, you've got that tool. It's just a little 80-cent ring you can buy. Sometimes they give it to you when you purchase the thing, but you can actually push this. Let's see if it comes off. Yeah, there it goes. So you just release it with that little plastic tool, and then you can pull the pipe out and use it all over again. You can do it over and over. I mean, you shouldn't have to, but I mean that's doable. Yeah.
It doesn't have a history of leaking or...
I kicked up the solar heater just to make more water for extra people, and the part of the loop is actually shark-bitten fittings because of the way I had to bend things and everything, and they haven't leaked. Didn't leak at all. And I twisted it and I yanked it and I pulled it. I wanted it to make it leak because I wanted to see if it was going to leak, and it didn't. So, the engineers figured that out. It's a good deal. But you take a look. You can pass that around and take a look at the way it's designed. See, there's little stainless steel teeth in there, and it goes in, but it doesn't come out unless you push that black thing in. Anybody have any questions about anything? We talked about iron pipe, like that, galvanized and black iron. We talked about PVC like that. We talked about CPVC, which is hot water PVC. We talked about copper, the rigid copper and the soft copper tubing. And we talked about PEX, polyethylene cross-linked plastic piping. Color doesn't make any difference. It's 180-degree limit at the high temperature. I think it's 100-pound pressure. So that's most houses don't have anywhere near that. And that's a special heating PEX, which is oxygen barrier. You can tell by the shininess of it. That's what they use in heating systems. Did you want to look at that?
Did you talk about wrapping, like underwater wood stoves for hot tubs and things like that? Like transferring heat?
No, but basically you'd make coils with this stuff. It's bendable. You would make coils with this stuff. It'd probably be better to use a 1/2 inch because it's easier to bend, and you would wrap it around something like a barrel or something. Well, it had to be bigger than that, but you would just do that. I couldn't. I'd have to go online to calculate how many gallons of water you'd need to make how many wraps, but at the size. But it's the surface area of the pipe that will dictate that. So you could just put it around a barrel or a tree or just keep on bending it and just pipe it in, dump it in there, and usually they separate each coil with some type of a riser or something. I mean, it could be plastic, it could be wood. Probably wouldn't work very well, but just some kind of if you could find some stainless steel that might, just so the coils wouldn't, they need to be separated a little bit.
Are there any code differences for any of these, and especially the SharkBite, I guess?
No, the code compliance, I don't think there's any issues with that at all. I mean, most of the stuff has been reviewed and passed by now. The only compliance part is the temperature and the pressure ratings. They have to be within limits. The other thing is that copper will lose its heat a lot faster than plastic and PEX. From a standpoint of energy efficiency, it would pay. It's well worth the effort to get a closed cell dense foam wrapping And that's not usually the stuff you get at Lowe's. I mean, you may have to go to the plumbing store. You can order it online. They send it in 6-foot long boxes, but it's either pre-slit or you slit it with a razor. But it's a gray, very dark gray, thick, foamy stuff that you can put on here, and that will really hold the heat in. There's a special one for solar that's UV resistant called Armaflex, I think it's called. But you don't need that if it's under the house. But you just do need a high density foam, and it'll tell you how many R value, what the R value is per inch or per, this size. It'll say this has, R3 or R4 or whatever it is. So that's not really all that expensive. It's usually lengths anywhere from $4 to $6 a length of 6 foot. For really good insulation. This is top quality stuff. And then you tape it. They give you a special, they don't give it to you. You buy a special 1-inch or 2-inch wide tape that you just wrap you can either put it on the crack and do it that way, or you can just wrap it every once in a while, every foot or so, and just so it clamps all along the.
So you're saying use that for copper. Do you need to use it for PEX?
Yes, you would use it. It's not, PEX will not lose heat as quickly, but it will still lose heat. So, I mean, if I was doing it and I had the budget, I would definitely wrap the hot water with insulation. And the other thing is, if you wrap the cold water with insulation, your chances of freezing are going to be reduced substantially, if not eliminated. Just depends. Under the house, you're probably not going to see 0 degrees, so unless you have, wind blowing through there on a cold winter night. So wrapping everything in insulation and hanging it properly is going to, and you can hang it with strap. Really simple job, wood screws, and this is copper. I mean, this is used with copper when you don't insulate it, but normally it's a galvanized strapping. It looks just like that, except it's silver or galvanized color. And you just take a piece of it, make a loop, like that, hang it, and then you put a screw through into the joist or the support beams underneath the house, and it'll hang. You don't want it to hang down like that. You want it to be close to the framing, but I mean, let it hang so you can keep it even, and you don't really want pipe to do that really, because it'll wear, it'll stress it after a while, after years.
So you use those SharkBite connectors with the copper too?
Copper and PEX, and it'll say on the SharkBite what it's for. This particular one says PEX, CPVC, polyethylene, or copper. Some of them say PB and PEX or whatever, because the polybutylene pipe, the gray pipe, is a very small different size than the outside diameter of the other pipe. So if you read the label carefully, and in Home Depot or whatever, you should probably ask the guy, and make sure you get somebody there who knows. I mean, if you're not comfortable with the way you answer, just find somebody else to do it, to answer you. But it'll say right on here. Yeah, the SharkBite's great. I mean, and it doesn't just come like that. They have tees, they have other fittings that work, repair couplings. They have longer ones, shorter ones, whatever. So you can shop around there and see see what you might need. The other thing is, when I buy valves and things like that, with PEX, I try to, you want to get brass because the iron's going to rust. The brass is more expensive, but you'll really be sorry that you saved $6 and then you have to crawl into the house and replace, 4 of these things, in 10 years. So we basically we would put our tape or our glue, our fitting glue on here, and do that at both ends, and then we put our PEX on there in the ring, and it's done. So, but again, this is all brass. It's not as cheap as galvanized iron, but it's to my mind it's worth the money. And this, just in passing, this is a ball valve. You've seen the valves that you have to turn, and they're okay. They will not seal as well, and they also will fail over time. These are pretty much, they won't fail. There's a ball in there.
Yes.
It's just a round ball, and when you open it, there's a hollow in the ball. You can pass around and look at it. I don't remember what that cost. I mean, they're not particularly cheap, but that's probably somewhere between $8 and $11 at that size. In the old days, they used to put a goop on here, and I have it. I don't really want it. I mean, I don't know what happened to it. Oh, here it is. It's just a really nasty glue. I mean, not only does it stink and it's not healthy and all that, but it's just messy. I just wanted to show you that we have it. And in some cases, like gas piping and stuff, you do have to use that. But for plumbing, we would just wrap. This is Teflon tape. It's really cheap. You take the strip of tape, you put it on the fitting in the direction that you're going to be turning it, So I'm going to, was it righty tighty, lefty loosey? So you're going to make a right. You're going to go clockwise to. You're going to go clockwise to make it tight. So if I'm going clockwise, I want to be sure the tail end of that ends clockwise. So if that's right, so I'm turning it that way. So when I tighten it, it's not going to want to bunch up and strip all the tape I've just put on there off of it. So it's going to always want to walk that tape closer onto the fitting. So we don't do anything with that. It's clean. We put the tape on that part, and then we just, it'll at first, it's very easy to go at first. It'll suck that tape right into the joint, and because these are tapered, all these, you can see the taper on that. They just, if you look really closely, it tapers like this. It gets a lot tighter the more in you go. So, I tighten. I'll have a wrench. I'll have a pipe wrench to do it, but you have to hold, when you use a wrench, you have to hold this part. You don't just tighten the part you're tightening. You have to hold this part and tighten with a pipe wrench, tighten the other part until it just is really tight. It's very difficult to break these. I mean, I've broken them and you can really lay into it, but for most people it's,
So you don't want to just hand tighten?
No, they have to be tight. They have to be socked down where it's uncomfortable to turn it anymore. And the beauty of it is you can, even if it's that tight, you can untighten it, take it off. And if the valve fails or you wanted to replumb or something, you can just take it off and clean the tape off and get a new valve and retape it and put it back on again or whatever. If you wanted to, if the valve didn't fail and you just had to put it together, you just do that. So it's not, it's not a big deal. A word about a pipe wrench. I'm going to pass that around because I'm going to show you how heavy it is. They're not light. It's really sloppy. This one, they're meant to be like that because they're easily adjusted. You always want to put the wrench so that when you're tightening, that part squishes the pipe. And it doesn't matter if it's a fitting, like the middle of that thing, or this fitting itself, like that, or even the iron pipe. I have to go a little tighter on it.
Saying the work of it would be on the handle part.
Yes, you want to force that in. So because if you did it this way, it's going to just continue to slip. It's going to open it, but this way, it really grips it. And you can see these are sharp. Well, they're not. I've used these a lot, but they're supposed to be pretty sharp teeth, and they really grip. And the other beauty is you don't have to. I mean, if you can get it straight on, that's great. But when you're really working quickly, it doesn't matter. It can be twisted. It'll go. It'll grab on here, and it doesn't matter. This will get all chewed up. It doesn't really matter. This is tough stuff. You can see how thick it is. So it's solid stuff. But again, we don't use iron that much anymore anyway. So I'm just pointing that out. But we still use these tools on the brass fittings because they're equivalent to iron, and they can take it. They're a little softer, but they can still take it. Just a recommendation for tools. I like this thing. I mean, it's a Peterson vice grip. Peterson company made these things since World War II. I think somebody bought them, but I think they still call it Peterson. Other people make them, but really, to my mind, this is still it's worth the extra, 10% premium to buy the real item instead of a imported knockoff or even some American-made. Other types like this are not as good because they will pinch you. They just have a tendency to pinch you when you release it. I don't know why. So it's worth the extra money. But this is neat because it has a little jaw in the front, and then you can really get big stuff in there. So that's nice. I mean, you can adjust it down to.
So it can fit all sizes.
Yeah, all sizes stuff. Yeah. And this is a little more pricey than the average. I don't remember what I paid for. It's probably $20 for this one. They'll normally run 12 or 13 for a normal type of wrench, but this big wide jaw one is neat because you can adjust the back of it to make it. So feel this. Squeeze it there. Now actually squeeze it tight.
Yeah.
So you got that, and then when to go to release it, see now it won't come out. It's it's really tight. When you go to release it, you just push that lever. Comes out. And what happens is with the cheap ones, And even they're not cheap sometimes. Sometimes they're expensive, and they still pinch. You get your even if I'm really careful, it'll somehow get your finger in there. So that's that. And here's another neat tool. And this, I really like this. It's an Irwin vice grip, and it has, the difference is most of them have curved channels that you have to go like this and pull it up and sort of find it. This has a little button. This is $19, I think, or 18. Has a little button, and it's very minutely serrated here. So you can go, so that's that one, but if you want to just go a little bit more, you just pull it down, and you got the next one, but it'll go way big like that one too. And it has a nice padded handle, and Irwin's the company that makes this. And a lot of these tool companies have merged, and they still might be the same major corporation, but they still kept their old names. So it doesn't really matter, but it's good to identify them. Premium American-made tools. And whether this is or is not made in America, I don't know. Usually they are, but sometimes they're made elsewhere, but they are made to exacting standards. So, it's okay. I mean, unless you have a thing about it has to be made in America, but which is, a good thing. So that was just a couple of tools. I mean, I just wanted, those are the ones you'll be using. I really want to get some soldering in here. So let's do it. I'm going to lay it in here because we're going to be working over that. Let's start with, I just sort of picked the 1/2-inch pipe because it's easier to work with and get a little quicker. Now the soldering technique can be used for a lot of stuff. I mean, galvanized gutters are soldered. Artwork is soldered, like copper, like decorative stuff. Art and
electronics have little solder.
well, it's a totally different solder. The solder for that's what we want. The solder for electrical work is called rosin core solder. Never use rosin core solder on any of this copper. I mean, for plumbing. The old style solder had acid in the core of it for the plumbing. So it was acid core solder for the plumbing. But now we've migrated totally away from lead in the solder, because it used to have a percentage of lead and a percentage of tin and maybe some antimony in there, some other stuff. This particular stuff is a combination of tin, silver, antimony, and a little bit of copper in it, maybe. And sometimes it doesn't have the copper in it. I mean, it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of different grades of solder for plumbing that also migrates away from plumbing and into like craft work and fixing gutters and other places where you'll need to do that. And they also have like 100% silver solder. They have 50-50 silver tin. They have different variations, but the main difference is that the old lead style solder would melt at a much lower temperature, so it's easier to work with, and you didn't need as powerful a torch and all that stuff. Now we are getting away from the lead solder because we don't want lead in the drinking water, so we're using this stuff. It's stronger. The only drawback is it takes higher temperature to make it melt, and it's a little more difficult to work with. So I'll show you the.
Can you use a 50-50 with this?
Yeah. The first thing is you got to get yourself a decent pipe cutter. You can use a hacksaw. Wow. You can use a hacksaw, but it leaves a really ragged edge, and we really don't want to. So we'll use a hacksaw on this stuff because you're going to have to take sandpaper to it anyway. But that's about the limit of it. This tool is a very inexpensive tool that we would cut this with. It just ratchets. It's square, and we just cut it off. Very simple, very clean. But this requires a special tool. This is not. I think that was probably about somewhere between $16 and $19. It's a Husky. It's a Home Depot brand, but you can get. I mean, this is perfectly fine. There's no reason to get a super name brand. I'll just cut a little piece off to show you. What we're going to do is, you can come up a little closer if you want. What we're going to do is make sure that's square, that's perfectly square to the pipe, and then this is a very sharp blade. We're going to just kiss that up against the pipe to start it.
Not too tight?
Not too tight, no, because you just want to really engage a line. And we're going to grab this, and you can do it with your hand. It's easier when it's a bigger pipe, but it just happens to be a 1/2-inch pipe. You're going to grab this and just walk it like that, a couple times, and then as we're walking it, we're going to tighten just a little bit, and go, a little more, and go. And you know, I've been doing it for a while, so I just do it as I just turn it as I do it. You may have to stop and think about it. It's easier when you have a table or a workbench to do it on. So we're just going to do that.
Do those tools last a while?
Oh yeah, and then they sell replacement cutter blades, which are cheap, and then you can just screw them in. So basically that's it. Now it wasn't difficult. Yeah, you can look at that. So the next thing we do is we take the end of the tool here. Onto this tool there's built a little burnishing device. It's a sharp file and a triangle that you take the inside of, yeah, you can feel it, the inside of the pipe. We do not want any burrs inside here. Mainly, it's not just for the water. It's not just to keep the water from backing up, but it's to seal between the solder and the copper. So it has to be nice and clean in here. And then we'll take this thing and we'll file, because this side of it's a file. And you can use I have a regular file I normally use, but you can just sort of file that so there's no burrs. Go around the outside.
Do they all come with that? Like,
Yeah, they all do. I mean, I would look when you buy it, make sure it does come, but they usually always do. Maybe some cheap one doesn't, but there's no point in buying cheap tools, really. You may save even 30%, but it's just not worth it. And in this case, this particular tool is as good as the rigid or the name brand cutter that I normally would have gotten. But I can tell because I've been doing this a while. But in the store, you might see one's pretty lightweight, and you know, just put that one down and get the real one. And you might ask somebody, you know, in there. So basically, I've cleaned that up. You know, get the rough stuff up, so I'm not, you know, as long as I can't cut my finger, I'm fine. But that has to be square and nice and clean. And it has to be so clean that we take these are made to, this is a 1/2 inch set, and there's a 3/4 inch set in that box for the bigger tube. But we have to make sure that the outside of this pipe is really clean. So that this has little brushes in it, inside there, stainless steel wire brushes. And we're going to get on there and push it all the way to the inside and turn it in one direction. And look how good that came out. And that's really nice. Okay? So then we've got the other one. The mate has to be just as good. I just grabbed this piece, brand new piece, but it's still, I want to make sure it's clean. We got the same kind of a tool, except it's a male. We're going to get it inside there and do the same thing. And now we're going to take the tool and we're going to, this is really important to get the outside, because you want to get the outside of this shoulder, make sure that's clean. Because when you put this on there, and I always test it dry without, you know, any flux or anything. So this is sort of a rough fit. I don't know why. I don't like that one, so I'm going to turn it around and do this one. So make sure I cleaned all that in there. I mean, maybe that was stepped on or something, so it's a little out of round.
so it seems like if you're using something like a T-piece like that, you would want to do all 3 of them to make sure that all 3 of them fit.
Yes, everything has to be done right. Yeah, before you actually put anything on there. Now sometimes you'll find that when you put the flux on there, it'll be a little slippery. It'll actually slip on there. So that one seems to be all right. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes they're a little loose, sometimes this one's pretty tight, but it's okay. I mean, it's fine. But what I was getting at was that that shoulder has to communicate cleanly with that pipe. So if this was dirty, if that little teeny shoulder was dirty, it's not going to seal, because that's really where the seal happens. It happens inside too, but it really happens on the outside. So now we're going to, okay, here we go. Thank you. Okay. So now I'm going to take the flux. Make sure you get the end that I think that was, yeah, okay. And I'm going to, this is a number 95. They have a couple different numbers. I like this 95. It's OD 95. OD solder and OD 95. The flux has a little bit of copper in it, little flakes. It's a cleaner and it's a lubricant and it's a flower. It lets the solder flow. So that's important. So we take the brush, lather this thing up, you know, get the end of it, get up to where we, you know, cleaned it. Same with the inside. You know, I don't really want to put too much on there, but it'll, you know, just run. But, you know, you have to put enough to make sure it's all covered. And then I can take the fitting and the pipe itself and fit them together. And again, this is an extremely tight one, but that's okay. It went on a little better that time because it's actually lubricated. And now what we're going to do is start this.
So is the solder going to go underneath that?
Yeah. If the other option too is to in places where those they don't work as well, you can always use this oxide paper. Comes in a roll a lot longer. That's great. Thanks. Comes in a roll a lot longer than that, and you can work, you know, around corners and stuff. The other important thing is this MAP gas. It's not it's not the old blue tank Burns-O-Matic torch that we're all used to. This is much hotter, and you really have to get this kind of gas and this kind of torch because.
And that's sold at your hardware?
Yeah, hardware. It's $49. The kit is $49. One jar, one head here, and they're auto start. This is the on and off nozzle. We'll turn that open a little bit. I'm not sure how we're going to do here with the flame, but so that's on, right? And that little button locks it on, so I don't have to fool with it. And this makes it real convenient because I can hold it. I don't hold it down here. Normally you'd hold it down here with the blue tank, but we don't, you know, this is much easier, so it's up here. If I need to, you know, instantly off. Now we adjust the, it's sort of difficult for me to explain the best. I can sort of hear it and I can see it, and it depends on the thickness of the pipe too, the thickness and the diameter of the pipe. But I'm just going to give it a, you know, a shot. This is basically, you don't really want to cook it. I mean, you don't want to get it so hot that it anneals the copper and you know, it may turn color. It will turn color, but you don't want it too hot. And it's sort of hard for me to tell you when that is, but we'll see. What we want to do is we don't heat the pipe, we're heating the fitting. Because what happens is we're going to get that fitting nice and hot, it's going to expand a little bit, it's going to transfer its heat to the pipe itself. When I take the flame away, it's going to create a vacuum, which when the solder melts is going to suck right into that thing. And that's exactly what we want. If I heated this pipe, it's going to actually, or if I continue to overheat this while I was soldering, it's going to blow the solder out, not suck it in. Now, I've done this long enough that I can actually, you may see me retouch that thing, but I know I'm not going to do it when it's bubbling and pushing it out. I'm only going to do it when it's sucking in. Sometimes I bend, most people will bend this little tip on like that so they can work with it easier. A good solderer will use, it'll take about the width of that pipe of as much solder. In other words, it's only half-inch pipe, about a half-inch of solder. Most of the time we use more, but you know, if you really get good at it, you can just use it and you don't waste all your solder. Now this thing, by the way, is a barrier. You can buy a cloth that does this. I just usually cut a piece of tin or something. It'll still transfer heat, but it'll protect the flame. So if you have a wall back here, I would just put this thing here. Your helper can hold that and you can be working on this. I'm going to heat that, and I'm aiming for really blue tip. It's in this range here. See, it's turning sort of greenish. First it gets shiny and then it gets green. It's probably not ready yet, but I can make a little test. There it goes. So we got, that actually is a little too hot.
Yeah, it doesn't take long, huh?
No, not with a skinny pipe like that.
So what happens if it's too hot?
It could crack that. It could deform the fitting. It could.
Would it pull all the stuff through?
It could bubble, it could boil so much that it would leave a void, but most of the time it will seal, but it weakens the joint, and it can split later on. Like if it was going to freeze, it might split prematurely to the freezing. So copper is really conductive to heat. So what we're doing now, and it's really important to clean that flux off. The flux is leaking out, and you can see it. Don't touch it, but you can see it.
Yeah.
You can see that oozy little, so that pus, that's going
Why
to,
is it important to clean?
because it's going to rot. It will actually rot the pipe. That was hot. You do not douse that in cold water or anything like that. You just take a moist rag. If you douse it in cold water, it's going to crack the solder seal. Just take a moist rag and you wipe that flux off there. This is sort of sloppy because it left a bubble. I put too much on there, but it doesn't hurt. It's just a waste of solder. But you can see how nice it absorbed into that. I can't let you touch it because it's still too hot, but you see how nice that is all through the thing. It looks clean. You see that? It's basically a similar metal melting bond in there. That chemically it does occur because the particles of the copper will get into the tin and the silver, and also there's a little bit of copper in the flux and in this particular solder, so it wants to mate even more so.
What's the likelihood of doing it incorrectly by getting it too hot? Is it common or?
It fails over time. It's pretty good that it's going to fail over a long period of time. You just don't get it too hot, that's all. I mean, you might have to practice. You might have to buy some pipe and just go through a bunch of it. I was a little too hot there because I could tell by how quickly it melted. It takes me, if I stop doing it, it takes me a while to get just one or two to get back into the swing of it. But we were knocking through them up there on the plumbing pretty quick on the solar stuff. If it did it incorrectly, this thing would be totally discolored, maybe even blackened, or very dark green, and it might even split. Usually it doesn't because you'll see that, but it could. And if it was boiling, you'll see little bumps. It won't be a nice smooth seal there. It'll be a bumpy one. And you'll see because it's gassed back out again and made a bump, and that'll definitely make it leak. If I wanted to fix this, and which happens, I mean, if I said, oh, that angle is wrong, I wanted to get this angle right, and I put a black magic marker here, and then I put another one on the pipe to make sure I was doing it right, and then somehow in my fitting I knocked it off wrong, and I still soldered it, and then I noticed I did it wrong. All you have to do is put it back down again, put the heat back to it, get your pliers and your glove, and pull it off again. And then heat it. The copper will all sort of spread out again. Put more flux on it and just do it over again. It's not wasted. I mean, I would like to use another pipe and all that. You can always, and if I had room, if I had enough pipe, I might cut it and do that. But it's faster. But we don't have to worry about that.